In this part of the training, we want to see an overview of available tagging elements. Later, in the chapter C, we will use the most important ones on example. When tagging elements are disabled like this, that means that some of the tagging elements is already selected, and in particular some of the elements where it's not possible to insert a new element within it. And with the field tagging element, that is the situation. So you need to click somewhere outside of the tagging element to see these elements enabled. So let me quickly explain what each of them means and how it is used. Field tagging element is the most commonly used one, and we usually use it to bring the fields from the report data source to our design. That's why it's also called field tagging element, and we saw how these two field tagging elements bound to the same field result in this on the left side. But generally speaking, we bind the field tagging element to an expression over our report data source. So let me demonstrate that on the example of this currently selected amount. We can edit existing binding by right-clicking here and saying Edit Expression. And here I have XPath expressions. We are using XPath as expression standard. And instead of pointing to merely field amount, I will say, for example, I want to increase this amount by 100,000. And because now the result will be double, I will see that also some default formatting for number will also be applied, even though I didn't apply any format. You see, it's now this value increased by 100,000, but if I apply here formatting, for example, N or N2, I will see now the formatting in the culture of US English language. So, as I said, field tagging element is used for bringing the result of an expression over our report data source data to the design. Special case is binding it directly to the fields, and that is the most commonly used one. List tagging element is a repeater. We use it to repeat certain content as many times as certain record appears in a collection of records or collection of data in our report data source. Speaking in a simpler way, usually what we would do, we would want for each line in our report data source to repeat some information. Let's say that I would say repeat this for every purchase order line, and this here, and this too. The content that I want to repeat, I need to select it, and I need to click a list tagging element. It will go around the selection. Here it is. And now I need, as a binding, to say based on which collection of data this will be repeated. In this case, based on purchase order line, so I can click here and say OK, or I can just double click. And if you remember, we have 7 purchase order lines. That's why for each of them, these 2 lines are repeated exactly as they appear here. It will be easier if I do something like this. If I use word numbering and here do something like that, now it is clear what's happening on the left side. Here I got this repeated 7 times. Usually you're not repeating something for the sake of repeating. You usually want actually to present the data from that line based on which we are repeating the content. So without too much explanation, I will add here now again the field tagging element that will bring, for example, item ID. So I will say field tagging element bound to, from the context of current line, bound to its item ID, and now I see these items. Where did these items come from? Values of item IDs. If you remember, we were talking about the sample data, so let's check that quickly. Here I got my 7 lines, and they have fields that are sorted alphabetically the same as they appear here. So I need to scroll to the right until I reach this field, item ID. Here they are, these item IDs here. So these values here, 001, 2 once again, so 2 twice, 3, here it is, 4, 4, here it is, and 7, here it is. Okay? We will deal with that obviously with more detail here on the table, but this was just for a quick presentation of what the list tagging element is doing. And notice the important difference between the field tagging element and the list tagging element. Field tagging element doesn't require any content. Whatever is written here, it is just for your convenience so that you quickly know when you scan this that this will be amount plus 100,000 and this will be amount. But I can start typing here whatever I want. As you can see, nothing has changed on the left side because all of this is completely removed and the content of this placeholder, so to say, is replaced by the value from the sample data in preview time and by the actual data in runtime. As opposed to that, list tagging element needs a content. It needs a content and it will just specify how that content will behave. In particular, it will be repeated. And it is similar case as with the list tagging element. It is similar with group. It will first group some content and then we can do further with it something else. And it will be also similar with if tagging element. It will need to conditionally show or hide content. So these three tagging elements, they need the content and they specify the behavior of that content, while the others bring their own content with it. Summary field is for a simple calculation of not just sums, but also various aggregation functions like min, max, count, and similar. And it's a simple point and click way of explaining what we want to summarize. Image tagging element, we would use it instead of the logo, for example, or imagine that you have a sales quotation where on each line you brought also through a development a field that is of a binary type, like this logo, and that carries a content of item image that you in runtime filled with the images of the items. And then you would use this image tagging element to bring those images to every line. For example, if tagging element, I already mentioned, we use it to conditionally show or hide content. These two I will skip, they are for some very rare and complicated scenarios. Chart is for displaying the charts. You would need some X and Y series of data and you would need to say which kind of a chart you need, some similar to Excel. Hyperlink, you need to bind it to an expression that can be resolved as HTTP address. Subdocument, similar to image, it needs to be bound to some binary type of a field, but that field will need to carry the content of some document. Think of terms and conditions that you would add to the end of the document, or maybe some item specification that you would like to show related to each line. Barcode is very simple, so let's demonstrate it immediately and finish with that. It is just usually need to be bound to some document ID. You will see examples of barcode tagging element on our warehouse related replicas. Let me point to, for example, Perch ID. Here it is. And here below you would select one of the symbologies that applies to your standard. For fun, I will use QR code. You can resize it, you can rotate it, and it is vector based, so it is very, very precise. And usually whenever you have a barcode information, you usually also have some human readable information, that same field. So I will also put one field tagging element and bind it to the same field, in this case again Perch ID. Where did this value come from? As you can imagine, also from our sample data. So let's check that. Perch ID. I misspelled. Perch ID. Here it is. And so this value 4 comes here, and you have, if you point a QR scanner to this block here, you will see that it will read exactly this same value as this one. And finally, labels, we will use them instead of the captions. So If you are not in US, then you have to take care that your reports will be nicely printed for multiple languages. And if that is the case, you don't want to stick to these fixed captions here and here, but instead you want to use the labels, and they will be then nicely correctly translated based on the report runtime language. And for you to be able to test that already here in the design, we introduced this possibility of selecting the preview language so that wherever the labels are applied and wherever the formatting is applied to dates and numbers, also the culture of the selected language will be applied. So this was the overview of our tagging elements. And with that, we finished the second part of this training, basic concepts and basic designer elements. Next thing we plan to do is to go through this mockup document and to replace some of its elements with the corresponding tagging elements so that we see how we will get the functional, fully functional template.